It's great to just all come together and celebrate my father's life. What a great celebration. Celebration. My father would be saying to Pastor Pounds right now, you're getting it right. You're getting it right. I've got a few things to talk about. Fortunately, several of my brothers and sisters gave me their 2 minutes. So it extended to about 7 minutes. Those that couldn't be with us today gave me their 2 minutes. So I ended up with 11 minutes. So I figured I'd better write a few things out here. And I'm going to take another 10 minutes. But about 2.5, 3 years ago, I was talking to my father. And I remember this just like we were talking yesterday or today. And it was so clear in my mind. It's so vivid to me. We're talking about the subject of one's mortality. And of course, he's in his 70s, late 70s by then. And so I turned it around on my father. And I says to Dad, you know what? We all have an appointment with death. It's scriptural. All of us, I do, all of you guys. We have an appointment with death. And not a real pleasant subject to talk about. But I remember explicitly, just like the look you see in his eye here. And for those who knew my father, you probably remember when he gets excited, he gets a glimmer in his eye. He gets this gleam. He gets excited. His eyes pop out a little bit. And his comeback to me was, Max, I'm looking forward to going to glory. Max, I'm looking forward to going to glory. And guess what we get to celebrate today? As Alan Richard Higgins is in glory. And that's a celebration. You know, I could tell he's very excited about it. And I wanted to fill in a few blanks. A lot of us know him as a Christian. A lot of us have known him as a minister. I wanted to start from the early days. He was born in 1930, so I don't know how many of us grew up in the 1930s, 1940s. You know, maybe a couple. It was a little different back then. We used to hear a lot of stories from my father. And I know I would, and Andrew and David and Valerie and Mears who were here would hang on every word of these stories he would tell us. I don't know how much they were stretched out, but they were good stories. And growing up in the 30s, things were very different. He didn't have a PlayStation, he didn't have an Xbox. He didn't have an iPad, he didn't have an iPhone. He didn't have much of anything. He didn't even have a black and white TV. It just didn't happen back then. But what he learned growing up in the 30s, and for those who have heard our grandparents talk about this can relate. Those who have heard our parents talk about it can kind of resonate with some of these stories. You learn to be self-sufficient fast. You had to learn to get it right quick. There was no entitlement mentality. Nobody was giving you handouts and things like that. You got to get out there, and you had to really learn to get it done yourself. Well, you couldn't blame others. You get a swift kick in the pants if you started blaming other people. It's learning to be self-sufficient, self-reliant. And I believe my dad, being raised in that era, and when you look at people who were raised in that era, they figured it out real fast. He told me he had to walk or run 5 miles to school one way. One way. He didn't have a bicycle. He didn't get dropped off at school like a lot of us do. He didn't get chauffeured to school. He ran one way. And in one pocket he would have a slingshot. Remember these stories? The other pocket he'd have a bunch of rocks. Why? Well, because the indigenous people, the Maoris, he had to keep them at bay. Because they were after him and his brothers. Those were the days. And if he wasn't busy keeping them at bay, you could guarantee none of the streetlights were going to stick around much longer. He grew up with horses. He didn't grow up playing baseball. He didn't grow up in Little League. He didn't grow up playing football. He grew up in horses. He grew up hunting. He grew up chasing wild boar. And boy, did we hear lots of those stories right there. With a knife. His rifle was not all that reliable. He'd go out with his dogs and a knife, and that's how he would have fun. I remember one story, he told us that in World War II he wanted to enlist. He was turned down because he was way too young. And then his brother Ray enlisted, passed away in the war effort. But one story, him and his brother Russell had all these rocks. And they hid and they threw these rocks on the schoolhouse. And the teachers, everybody came out as they were yelling, Hail Hitler, and took off. The other story he told me, and again, I don't know how stretched these stories were. There were lots of them. The school teacher, and normally it was the one school teacher, because he was in a rural area, and the school teacher had blamed him for something he did not do. So, of course, it was his turn to get the cane, because that was typical back in that day. And so he figured that he wasn't justified in getting the cane. And so the story goes, he grabbed his school teacher, he lifted him off his feet, and he pegged him one of those very large clothes pegs and left him dangling as he walked out. That was my father, learning to do things his way. So anyway, he did know horses very well. He knew how to ride a horse. When the circus came to town, they had a segment of the circus, the rodeo. And my father was about 15 at this time. And anybody who could ride this particular jumping horse for a period of time earned a pound. A lot of money back then. They earned a pound. So lo and behold, my father, who liked to overachieve, he earned the pound that night. They invited him to stick around and ride in the rodeo. He writes a note home saying, hey, I'm out of here. And for 3 months, he rode buck-jumping horses in a rodeo, which was part of the circus. That's the kind of guy he was. Self-reliant, self-sufficient. He got things done. He did it his way. But he got it done. When we look at him in the early 20s, he didn't go to university. He didn't come up with wonderful business plans. He just went out there and started a business. He was a contractor. He was a fencing contractor, and he developed a very strong reputation as a guy who would get it done, who would do a quality job. You could depend upon him starting a job, finishing a job, and doing it right in the roughest terrain you could imagine. This was tough terrain he would go out in, and I'd been out there with him. Mears was telling me on the way up, she had her benches. The same with Valerie, she had some benches. And it was very, very challenging terrain. But in his early 20s, before long, because of his reputation, he had 18 guys that worked for him, going out doing contracting in rural areas. His projects were booked up 6 to 9 months ahead, so it would take almost up to a year before you could get him to come and do a contract. We'd love that in this day and age, I'm sure. But that's the reputation he had. His reputation was he'll get the job done. But he never signed a contract. He didn't need to. Can you imagine never signing a contract as a contractor? Everybody paid him. He had 18 guys behind him that wanted paychecks. So he sure got paid. And one of the interesting things is that he was the first person in New Zealand to ever have a contractor's license. The first person ever. He showed it to me once. It was nothing fancy, just a little piece of paper. He was actually the first person in New Zealand to bring in some pneumatic or high-powered equipment, post-haul diggers, tractors, things like that. So there's several firsts that he had. And he'd tell me all these wild and crazy stories and things like that. One such story, and this goes back to the kind of guy he was, the kind of guy who would love to overachieve. He told me in a pub one night, he wrestled 15 men. There's a competition on an easy stick. The stick just walks across, comes across your body, and you hold on to it. Another person is sitting on the other side, and you've got to wrestle them over the stick. Well, the person who ended up undefeated was my father. Did you remember that story? You didn't get that one. Okay, I got that one. So anyway, years later, when he had a bad back and a bad hip, I wish he'd quit at contestant number 10. But it caught up to him a little bit. But he loved races. He loved the horse races. He loved to go to the trots or the races, and he actually had his own horse. He had his own racehorse, this guy. He brought in one of the only imports into the country because he's a contractor and doing well. At one stage, we lived high on the hill. Disney Road Hill. We had a beautiful house with gardens. one of the imported cars. We had everything you can imagine. But soon things were going to change. And things were going to change significantly for the family. Because despite all his successes, despite all the things that he had done, none of it was fulfilling to him. And at some stage he had heard about Jesus. He had heard the gospel of Christ. And he tells me that in a rural place, a place all by himself, he asked Christ to come into his life. It made a huge difference.
Yeah.
He wasn't in a congregation. He wasn't in a church. It was a rural setting. And Christ did come into his life. Many of you may have heard that. He had a burning sensation of the Holy Spirit go through him for a period of a week. From there he went and started just telling people all about Christ. He didn't know about it. This is the kind of guy he was. He just started sharing Christ. One of his best friends says to him, "Hey, you've seen the light." He says, "Yeah, I've seen the light." Well, from there, with his enthusiasm, he went on to Bible college in Tauranga, New Zealand, and spent several months with a lot of his friends, his dear friends that have either passed on or near to him this day. And learned about some very special truths that he would minister. In technology, we had bleeding edge technology, leading edge technology. A lot of these truths were very special, and he pioneered them. It probably took a couple of decades for them to catch up into the mainstream, but they were very near and dear to my father's heart at the time.